Do you know why it's called a listing?
I do not know. Why is it called a listing?
Well, before we had a lot of the modern technology that we have, peddlers would go from town to town selling their ware. And if you wanted to sell your farm, he would put it on his list of things to be sold and let somebody in the next town over know it. So he created a list of property for sale, and the peddler took it around from town to town. Our term listing goes all the way back to the peddlers in pre-Revolutionary War time.
Really? Learn something new.
Hey, I don't know much, but what I know, I know. Hey, this is Gary Hughes, otherwise known as Nova Agent, your realtor for life, and this is Yogi. Everybody knows Yogi. He is the hardest working dog in real estate. We're back to talk settlement and title things with my friend David Kartner.
Hi, I'm David Kartner with Highland Title and Escrow. I'm an attorney over there and branch manager for the Arlington and DC offices. So I'm very excited to be back with you, Gary.
Great, I'm glad to have you back. Hey, this time we're going to talk about what it costs to go to settlement and what one would expect to see on that settlement statement. And just to recap, I think we've covered this before, but we used to get a document called the HUD-1.
Correct.
Now it's called an ALTA, A-L-T-A.
Yes.
So let's start with the name, and then we'll go down and talk about what's on the buyer side and the seller side, and why the buyer's costs are different than the seller's costs. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good.
Okay.
It used to be called a HUD-1, same thing we talked about earlier. And then probably about 5 years ago, the CFPB, that was formed, decided to change it all up because
Consumer Finance Protection
Bureau. Yep. They thought they wanted to change it up because they thought there was too much information for both parties to have in one sheet, right? So they came out with the closing disclosure. So that's why buyers, when you see it, you'll hear this whole closing disclosure because that's very important for them, right? They have to have the preliminary CD, and then they got to get a CD 3 days prior to settlement, right? Because if they don't have that, things may not happen on time. And so it's always very key for the buyers to acknowledge that. And it's also key for the buyer to know how much money they have to bring to the table, basically.
So it is the lender who is providing the buyer with the CD or the closing disclosure, both a preliminary closing disclosure, then a final closing disclosure. And they also provide that to you. Correct.
They do. Usually we don't see this closing disclosure probably till about a day or two before closing. That's why they have buyers. We get a lot of calls because whatever the bank has done for them, their lender has done for them, sometimes doesn't have any of our fees in it or anything from us because they have not talked to us yet. Or especially if there's an HOA, they don't know what the HOA dues are.
Right.
So that changes a lot sometimes, especially to know what the HOA is. If there's a capital contribution, which means sometimes HOAs in this area require new owners to pay 1 or 2 months of HOA fees up front. And it's for their capital contribution, just so that they have money in the reserves, basically, what's going on. So
we'll do another conversation about reserve funds and condo fees and homeowners association, because that is very important, but that will be another discussion.
We'll do that.
But those numbers show up on the final ALTA.
Yep.
And they're prorated. So if I've paid my condo fees on the 1st of the month and we go to settlement on the 5th of the month.
Yep.
What happens?
So you as a seller, let's say the seller has paid their HOA fees for the month of June, and we don't close until June, let's say the 15th, right? So you're going to get a credit back on the ALTA or the CD. They're the same. They have two different names, but it's the same numbers either which way. And so you're going to get a credit back for the time period that you did not own the property, right? So you'll get a credit back from the 15th to the end of the month of June, and that will show up in your columns. So let's talk about the ALTA though, right? So the ALTA is what we all see because it has both sides. Left side always has the seller's information, usually 2 columns. There's the debit and credit column. And so what we usually focus on at first is to see the debits. What's being, who's responsible for the different debts, what's going on and what is happening. Both the buyer and the seller have their both columns of that on the same page. What we focus on a lot on the seller, the first thing that they like to see on the debit columns, usually if there's any kind of seller credits or something along the lines of that, that's always on there. The next thing you usually see are the commissions, right? So when the sellers agree to list the property, you all have had your listing agreement, and whatever you've agreed to pay the buyer and the seller, the the selling agent, and then you as the listing agent is going to show up on the seller's side. That is part of what they've agreed to, whether it's 6%, whether it's 5%, whatever it is, that's what they've agreed to. So the seller will see that on their side. Those are the two biggest ones. That's the biggest debt right there, usually, besides whatever loan they have to pay off, right? So if they have a lender out there, say they bank with Wells Fargo, right? That's their mortgage. So we get a payoff from Wells Fargo. We have to order it directly from the bank that gives it to us with a good through date of whatever the date of closing is to make sure that we have enough money to pay it off, right? That's a big thing.
So they don't just look at what the balance of the loan is. They say, okay, if you paid it off on Thursday, this is how much you would owe us.
Correct, right.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't understand that. When you look at if you pull into your bank and look at your statement, you'll see your unpaid balance is what it says, right?
Yes.
That's how much money is owed. That is always a little bit lower than what the actual payoff is, right? Because they haven't put in the interest and so forth like that. And since banking and owning a house is a little bit different than renting, you always pay in arrears, right? So you always pay for the month you've already lived there. So when you prorate in the month of June, you haven't paid for June 1st to the 15th yet, so they got to add in that interest, right? And so then your balance goes up. So that's kind of
So it's
what
going to be a little different than if you just look at the...
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's changed. I mean, that's always on there on the seller's side. And then there's the rudimentary closing costs for us, right? So generally...
What would some of those include?
So if there's a payoff, usually we charge like a $135 to pay that off, to make sure that gets released in the land records, to make sure everything happens with that file. And then there's always our deed prep fee for the seller. I'm just talking about the seller side for right now. And so to prepare the deed, which will transfer ownership from the seller to the buyer, it's usually it's $150 for us. That's what we charge for that. And then we have our settlement fee, and our settlement fee is $650. What we have currently, both the seller and the buyer pay the same settlement fee. But for the sellers, we have that on there. And then sometimes we have a $55 basically wiring fee or FedEx fee, depending on what's going on and what's happening with who we're paying off and everything else. And then the last three things, we got the Commonwealth of Virginia. Let's talk about Virginia, right? So Virginia has 3 lovely taxes on there, right?
And I'm just going to hold you up for just a second because we need to talk about Virginia, which is a little bit different than Maryland, where you have every county has some different things, and it's different than D.C. So this is focusing on Virginia. Very important.
Yeah, we'll talk about Virginia. And we're only going to really talk about Northern Virginia because that is what we really deal with, right? Overall, the state of Virginia has a grantor's tax. It's $1 per thousand in the sales price. That's statewide, okay? And then the northern 6 counties, basically, we got Prince William, we got Loudoun County, Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington. Those counties up here are the ones that will charge these 2 other fees, they like to call it. One's called the Regional Congestion Relief Fee, right?
That sounds like something you would go to CVS to get cured.
Yeah, exactly. You just go pick up a pill. It's fine. It's not a big deal. The best way I can explain it is it's helping out those great hot lanes in Northern Virginia. That's what you're paying for, right? That's basically what's going on. And then there's something called the WMATA Capital Fee, which is really the Washington Metro Transportation Association. That's what it is. And it is going towards helping out subway lines, bus routes, and everything else, and that is what's going to. Both of those are all $1 per thousand in the sales price. So everything's even. You'll see all this stuff broken out for the seller, usually 3 in there. So let's say the sales price is $500,000. It's $500 each time. So it's $1,500 worth of taxes on that. So
we're seeing a new station being built on the Yellow Line at Potomac Yards.
Yep.
So if you've sold a house recently, you've helped finance that.
You've helped out.
Okay.
Or the Silver Line that goes out to Dulles, which who knows when that will ever open. But that is what's going on.
Okay, so you're helping to pay for that.
Yes.
So that's where some of that money is going.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So it's going into the counties, and the counties are the ones that are distributing it to the projects. So whichever county goes into it. So that's what they do.
Do we still have stamps and...
We call it kind of recording tax. It's not really a stamp. They do stamp it when they record everything in the county. So the sellers pay that. That's to record everything. Those are those taxes for that. And then the buyer pays to record the actual documents, right? So there's the deed, which will transfer ownership. And then if there's a loan out in the property,
that has to be recorded.
There's a deed of trust. That's what it is. And so the deed of trust and the deed are taxed and recorded for different things. To actually record the documents, It's usually between 50 and 65 bucks for each of them. But then the taxes that the county get and the Commonwealth of Virginia get are different. And they based on the sales price of the property for the deed, that's what they do it, or the assessed value, whichever one's higher. And then they do it on whatever the loan amount is, right? So if you have a $100,000 loan, it's going to be less as compared to if you have a $500,000 loan. So they base it off the loan amount of how much money that the county and the state would like. And so those are costs there that are fixated. I think there's $3.33 per thousand on the sales price, basically. So that's kind of where it ends up being like that. So we've gone through the seller side, and the seller side's seen with that. And then we'll talk about, so then there's the credit. Big credit's the sales price of the property. So whatever you helped them out to do, that's what you got. So let's say the property's $1 million. Then you'll see some prorations, right? You'll see some prorations of taxes. So depending on what time of the year, where it is, there's always the taxes for, first half of taxes just got paid, basically, for most of the counties that are pretty much going to it. So there's a credit for the time period that they didn't own the property. Same thing we do with the HOA prorations. So same concept with that. So those are usually the 4 credits that they have in there on the sellers and what's going on. And then we'll switch over to the buyer side. There's a debit and credit side on the buyer side. Their side, usually the debit side is what you're looking at is the sales price of the property. It's a big one. The prorations of their HOAs and things like that. And then there's a good percentage of what they got from the bank. So the bank has all their cost in there. Mm-hmm. So whatever their origination fee is, whatever their document review fee, they like to call it all different things, whatever. Every bank's a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. So they just come up with these different names, but it's all about the same stuff. But there is always an origination charge, especially right now what we've seen with interest rates. People have been buying down their points, right? Mm-hmm. So that's been one of the things, right, for right now. And then any kind of, there's always a flood certification charge on there to make sure you're not in a floodplain. There's always whatever money they have in their escrow account. That always, a big question I get a lot is every time you do a closing, you always have to prepay your homeowner's insurance for a full year.
First year.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's always on there. So you always do 12 months for that. But then there's an escrow account, right? So in the escrow account, they might collect another 3 to 4 months in that escrow account. And so what people always ask me, they're like, well, why am I paying this extra 4 months of homeowner's insurance? And I was like, well, technically it's going into your escrow account. It's still your money, but what the bank's trying to do is to have enough money when that bill comes due next year that they can make that payment for you.
So it's a reasonable thing when you call the insurance company and they say your homeowner's insurance is going to be $1,300.
Yep.
You know you're going to pay that $1,300 at closing, but you need to add a little bit more to that, just like when we were talking about the loan payoff. You need to add a little bit more to that that's going to come out of your pocket when you're at the settlement table.
Yep. Exactly. It is part of the escrow account, and it will fluctuate. Now, whether it gets rolled into the loan, you change. Yeah, that depends on what the bank's doing and what you've chosen to do with the bank. Mm-hmm. But it is definitely an additional cost because you have to have the escrow account. Now, if you put down over 25%, basically, banks will say that you don't have to have an escrow account. You can request not to do it, depending if you want to be the one to make the bill payments when they come due.
You just need to make sure you've got that
yes.
homeowners or the homeowner's insurance ready to be paid when that bill comes
Exactly.
due.
That and the property tax.
And the property tax. You need to make sure. So if you've got, $6,000 property tax bill or an $8,000 which is not unheard of around here, and some people have even more, because they're not able to use all of the deduction because it's capped at $10,000 for the. But you need to make sure that you have that money when the tax bill comes.
Exactly. Right. People think that if you can do something with your money in the 6-month to 8-month time period that's going to make you more interest, go right ahead. I personally I have an escrow account. I don't want to worry about it. That's what it comes down to. And that's just me. But that's how we choose to do it.
The consequences of missing can be more
correct
than the gain that you.
Yes, the county will give you a nice late fine, right, if you do not pay on time. So that's
they like their money.
Yes, they do. There are 2 title insurances usually on there. So there's lender's title insurance, which is based on the loan amount, right? And then there's the owner's title insurance. Owner's title insurance is optional. There are 2 different ways. I think we talked about this last time, but there are standard and enhanced is what it is. Enhanced is what's always quoted. Ends up being about 20 to 25% more than what the owner's is. The different coverages cover different thing. We could sit here and talk about it for So I was blue in the face about it, but we'll do that at a different time.
We'll do another one on those two insurances because I get a lot of questions. Should I buy the enhanced? Is the standard sufficient? And it's very situational.
It depends, right?
It really
a condo is different than a single family home.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. Condo is different.
A townhome is different than a single family home. A condo is different. You know, how much land are we talking about, right? Are you buying in Arlington County or are you buying in Loudoun County, right?
Yes.
Like you might have an acre out there and you're only going to have a postage stamp here in Arlington, so that's the way it works. The key thing is like right now, so we're settling here in June. Let's say you settled identity closing today, right? Their first payment is not due until August 1 right now, right? So it's always usually
of the arrears,
right? So you pay a little bit of it up front. You're basically at closing costs. You're paying for the month of June, basically, and then so whatever it's prorated in, that's what it's part of the cost there, and then your first payment's not due until until August 1. So it's always in the back, so it's different than rent. So it's just something to think about when you're purchasing the property and what's going on and what's happening. Our website has quotes on there for everybody.
So someone could go on to highlandtitle.com and figure out a quote.
Yep.
And they'll ask you things like, what's the purchase price and what's the county tax and
what's your how much money are you going to get? What's your loan amount? Right, all that bases off of different things. So you can at least see what the taxes are and everything else. What will not show on ours will be we don't know what your lender is going to. We have no idea. Quicken, Rocket Mortgage charges different than USAA, right? So they all charge differently. So we don't know any of that stuff, but you can kind of get that.
You can get a good idea of what it's going to cost, and then when you talk to the lender, you can get the rest of those numbers.
Yeah. And we actually have a seller net sheet on there as well, so you could, if you knew as a seller and you wanted to see, well, this is how much commission I'm going to pay, this is what I think my payoff is, and put all that stuff, you could at least see your final number. Or if it's close, you'd be close to it. So
let's say someone doesn't want to do that. They're trying to figure out the money just broadly. What would be a percentage that you would say to someone, look, if you just want something really, really rough, don't count on it being right, but just really, really rough.
Right.
What percentage would a buyer and what percentage would a seller kind of pull to say, okay, it's going to be?
I think a buyer is probably about 2.5%. I would say. Don't hold me against that, but it's somewhere around that. It's going to get you
close.
It'll get you close to see what's going on.
Until you can get the real numbers going.
Yeah, and it depends on how much money you're borrowing, right, and what you're paying in cash, right? It depends if obviously cash is cheaper. It's just you don't have to pay the lender fee. It's one less thing I'm recording, right? So that's what's going on. But
oddly enough, it will also depend what time of the year.
It's true,
right? Yeah, because if you hit it just right, where the property taxes haven't been paid.
Yep.
Right, and you're going to end up having to pay those soon. So
in general,
or as a seller, you're not going to get a
big credit back. You might get half. You might get a small credit back, right? So that's the other thing with sellers that you don't think about. If they have a loan and they have an escrow account, right, and the bank has been paying their property taxes and homeowners insurance, once the bank is paid off, the bank has 30 days legally to send you whatever's left in your escrow account. So if there's any overpayment that you did of the payoff, right? We always overestimate because you don't want to be short on the payoff. Because what happens is you send the money, you're short. The bank's like, well, it's great, but you're still short.
Not paid off.
Yeah, exactly. Please send us another $50 because we're not going to, we're not going to sign this off. We're not going to do anything, right? So we always overestimate a little bit just to make sure everything gets in there because any payment that's in there, if they get overpaid, all that money comes right back to the seller. So
just don't worry about it.
Right, don't worry about it, but it's always something to know that you have money, especially depending on the time of the year or what's going on. And usually what the lender is, just to kind of knowing from what we deal with, is if the tax payment is coming due within 2 months, the lender usually wants us to pay it off, right? So within 60 days, they want us to make sure that it's all paid off. So either we collect the money and credit back or make sure that it's been paid off by the seller. So when they came out with the CDs, we still needed some document that kind of looked like the HUD-1 that had signatures so everybody could sign, said, hey, look, seller signed, we agree, buyer signed, we agree, you sold the property, right? And you purchased the property. So we needed something to have there. So all the title companies went with American Land Title Association since they're kind of our, any kind of company, they kind of just rule the roost and tell us what's going to happen, so we end up adopting it. And so that's what you see all the time now.
I really appreciate it. We have some other topics that we're going to cover. Check back once a month. We'll be uploading this to Nova Agents YouTube channel, and hopefully maybe we're going to share it, and maybe Highland Title will want to put it on as well.
No, it'd be great. I do appreciate it. So,
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rick. Yogi says goodbye too.
bye-bye.